Now we are going to move on to how to talk about your competition, how to think, how to evaluate your competition, and also how to communicate that effectively with your investors. And for that session, we have Agata, who is the program manager at Plug and Play Ventures. Plug and Play Ventures is a total beast in the US, and it's so exciting that they've come over to the UK. They invest in around 250 companies per year, have over 60 accelerators that they run per year in 35 different countries. And I think they've worked with over 500 corporations. They do a lot around corporate innovation and supporting corporates to connect with startups as well. Agata, outside of Plug and Play, also runs Pink Brew Studio, I think I've got that right, which is working on supporting female founders working in climate tech. And previously before that, she was at Elmarks. So Agata, do you want to start off by giving a little introduction and expand about what you do at Plug and Play and Pink Brew? And I just nearly spilt my afternoon coffee. And talk about what Plug and Play focuses on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for being here. I know it's quite late in the day and you seem to have a session beforehand, so I really appreciate your time. I'm Agata Bendik, a program manager at Plug and Play. Very well said. So Plug and Play is a massive company. For those who haven't heard about it before, we are one of the most active early stage investors in the world, with 45 or 47 offices across the globe. So we are going strong in the US, but we also quite present in the European markets with the recent launch in the UK. So in April this year, we opened the innovation platform with our partners Jaguar Land Rover and a couple of different mobility companies around the UK. And we also partnered with BT, so the BT group, and we are working on different sort of verticals, so IoT, health tech, EV, etc. The Plug and Play, that's both sides. We do invest in early stage companies, but we do focus on the B2B side. And we prefer the software related companies. So 80% software, 20% hardware, if we were to look at it from this perspective. But we also love corporations, and that's our bread and butter of what I'm doing. I specifically focus on the corporate relations that we have here in the UK, but over across the globe as well. So that's it about Plug and Play. And then at Pink Brew Studio, it really started with the fact that greenwashing is such a standardized process at the moment, plus the fact that women still get less than 2% of overall startup tech investment in the UK. So I believe that this needs to be changed, and women need, not that they need it, but they also could perhaps use, if they would like to, a bit of support on how to speak to investors, how to gain confidence, and basically how to get that investment in, especially when we talk about the first institutional investment after the friends and family rounds.
So this is a really broad question to start off with, but what are your top few tips on presenting your brand to investors? Like, as a really early stage company, you may not have many customers, you might not even have a product fully launched into with customers yet. So how do you how do you seem like a startup but also seem polished at the same time?
Yeah, that's a great question, because obviously you don't have customers, so you don't have a product, but at the same time you need to convey what you're doing to your potential investors or partners, etc. One thing that we love at Plug and Play, I mean, we are inherently a Silicon Valley based office and a company, and you know, the difference between European markets and the American markets, and we often laugh about that, is that in the US it's all about having a polished pitch deck and a great idea, and then you get $1 million quite easily. Whereas in Europe, you need to have 10 customers on board, you have great traction and ideally a really nice funding beforehand. So it is a little bit different, and I'm not going to lie, it's not as easy as it is in the US. I would say that traction is the most important thing, and very often people confuse traction with customers or market presence. For me, looking at traction can be so many different things, and it's about your own creativity to spin any positive message that you receive into your traction. Let's say you've been featured in an article in FD or Sifted, put that in, that's traction. Your market presence in terms of people who know your brand, that's traction. You want an Innovate UK grant, that is traction. Anything that you do and that has a positive outcome is your traction. It doesn't mean that you need to have a paying customer or even a working product. If you're part of an accelerator like yourselves, that's also traction, because that's someone or a brand or a company or an advisor vouching for what you're doing.
Really well said, all about storytelling. So when it comes to talking about your competitors, how in depth should you, one as a founder, or how much should you focus your attention on your competitors at pre-seed stage and then seed stage, and then how much of that should you share with investors?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a great question, because obviously the way you talk about your competitors will change with your company development stage. And at the very beginning, I mean, we're a Plug and Play, we obviously work with early stage investors. So this is something that we see all the time practically, where startups do not put their competition in their pitch deck, and it's already a red flag. I've heard myself a couple of different founders who said, well, we don't really have any competition. Our product or service is so disruptive that we don't have competition. Another red flag. Never say that. And I think, investors will grill you, and they will automatically have a different point of view if you try to tell them the story of not having any competition at all. So I would say at the very beginning, because the market traction is still insignificant at in the early stage pre-seed series, pre-series, I would say that your competition is playing a significant part of who you are and where you want to go, because you're still finding the product market fit. What that means is that your competition is your benchmark of what you want to do and what you don't want to do. So I would say that mentioning your competition and really doing and I know you probably have done it, but I always encourage founders to do more and more research into what your competitors are doing, but also what your competitors are planning to do. So kind of stalking them and looking at their product roadmap, even speaking to them. I mean, being open about it, but very often you can find more when you talk to your competitor. You can find more about where you align and where you don't align, which is also great recommendation when you would like to differentiate from your competitor. Later stage, obviously at this point, you've proven your product market fit. Perhaps you're thinking about expanding to different geographies, different markets, maybe changing your business model. That's where your competition still matters, but maybe not as much as it mattered back in the days. And so in this case, I would look at a competition not from a single, this is the same competitor who does the same product, but I would look at, this is a competitor that might also go into the same market as I am. Looking at a competitor from a perspective of, well, Google can develop the same product, or all the metaverse startups perhaps had a very terrifying time whenever Facebook changed their name to Meta, because then they realized that, oh my God, this is actually happening. So I think at this point, you need to think about your competition in a more holistic way.
How do you suggest that founders respond to the inevitable question of, well, can't Google, Meta, Amazon just do exactly what you're doing? Because it seems like that question is always going to get asked, like what happens when the industry giant enters your space? What are the best ways at responding to that?
In this case, I mean, we sometimes at Plug and Play, we unfortunately have to forego investment because of that. And it very often happens because the startup doesn't really either protect their IP, which is incredibly important to, if you are a startup, especially in the software space, you need to think about the ways you protect your IP. And it doesn't have to be through patents. I think very often people also jump to conclusions that you need to have a patent, which is incredibly expensive. And if you can't afford it, you can definitely protect your IP in multiple different ways. So I would suggest discovering that. Another thing is Facebook went into Meta, and I think they spend around $8 billion on it right now, but it is nowhere near to where the best metaverse startups and Web3 startups are right now, because obviously Facebook does a little bit of everything, not so successfully recently, unfortunately. So I would say that, yes, Google can always develop what you're doing, and they will, and that's okay, because I believe that if this is your core value, first of all, you're agile, and B, you know exactly where you're going. And then the thing is that ultimately, if you think that you do something that Google could always move on to, don't think about it as a competition, think about it as a potential alignment, because maybe Google one day will buy you, and that's probably the best outcome that could happen. So try to be better than whatever Google or Facebook or Amazon are trying to do, and then always think about the fact that you may always exit into these companies.
Yeah, absolutely. And now there's so many good proof points that companies can exist in those spaces and still do phenomenally well, like Dropbox or Superhuman or DoorDash with Uber. So yeah,
absolutely.
What are the best ways to communicate why you're different when it's a really saturated market? Like, let's say it's a bit of payroll software or a neobank, or it's in an industry that people have heard a lot of pitches about. How do you stand out?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that early stage always has, obviously you have you're in the less fortunate position because you need to prove that you're better than your competition. And I think that comes down to a couple of points, and obviously those points might align with your company and they might not. But I would say knowing your competition and what they're doing exactly, and going niche to win is where you can actually go for. Because at Plug and Play, we invest into very disruptive technology, and we invest into quite narrow scope across all the verticals, so B2B, SaaS, etc. That means that we go through a ton of the same pitch decks for, let's say, carbon calculators, or I don't know, payroll software, for example, because that is one of our verticals. How do you differentiate good from great is how you understand your competition and what niche of the market you're actually servicing. B is the traction that you've got. I love traction, and you probably will hear me talk about that a couple more times, but I believe that just being very thrifty with things that you get and speaking to lots of partners, getting names on board, getting the advisory board is incredibly important. And I would say that 3 is, that if you can enroll in accelerator, not always you have to give your equity away or pay for it, but even if it's a government sponsored accelerator or something, put it on there, put it on the deck to make sure that you will stand out. And then the last thing will be your team. If you're a single founder, focus on finding a co-founder. If you have the technical capacity in your team, you're already on the win. If you don't, try to find that person, because you will need that in order to stand out across, especially if that market is quite saturated. As I said, payroll or carbon calculators. We've invested in a couple, but there is a massive need to stand out.
And just a reminder for everyone here, you're all already in an accelerator. So that's something that you can put on a deck right there.
Exactly. Yeah, put that Hotbed logo in there and kind of shout about it, because this is an incredibly important part of your journey. And I believe that if I see a startup that's been through an accelerator, for me, it's already a sign that you have your investment readiness, that your pitch deck is great, that you've been through some sort of training, that you know how to speak to your investors, etc., etc., etc.
You raised a really good point, which is that you're investing in climate tech, so you're probably going to have a few like carbon calculators in your portfolio. So how should founders look at who is in your portfolio? Because for VCs that are sector specific, they're probably going to have a company doing something similar to you. So how do you assess whether or not they have a competitor and whether or not they're worth approaching?
Yeah, great question, because with our portfolio of, I think 2,000 startups, it probably is impossible, but there are funds that are a little bit smaller, which is easier for you guys to take a look at the different portfolio startups. Basically, we never invest in startups that have a potential of conflict of interest. And it does make sense, because we don't want to create that tension between our portfolio companies. So I would say feel free to approach all of the investors that you find fit, even though they might have invested in a startup that's in the similar space. But I say that because I believe that sometimes you might find that startup of being a direct competitor. That doesn't actually have to be true. It might be a complementary service to what you're doing. So understanding your competition, but also understanding startups that are in the same space, but maybe service a different market or a different customer, is super important, and goes again to knowledge, about the deep knowledge, comprehensive understanding of your competition, not only in the direct competition, the one-to-one competition, I would say, but also understanding the secondary competition and then tertiary competition. So you have the layers of, you can be, your payroll software could be the exact startup that does something, but in a different geography, but it also could be, Google for one, because that's where you can find information about all of that. Maybe a terrible example, but I hope that message got across. So yes, no, I mean, yeah, I guess that's all.
Okay. Reminder everyone, we'll move to Q&A shortly, so start putting your questions in the chat and raise your hand if you want to ask a question live. So do you suggest that when you're speaking about competitors in your space, maybe not competitors, but people doing something similar to you, is it a good way to demonstrate that it's a hot market if you say, oh, hey, these are some big name companies that have just raised, 20 million at a seed round from Sequoia, or does that scare investors off?
No, investors love that, because obviously investors are humans and they're also risk averse humans. And if you can prove to the investors that, yes, there is a startup in our space that just raised, this is a great traction, not for you, it's traction for the product. And then what I would suggest is that you immediately follow it with what we do better or differently, or why our product is superior to the product that was just invested into, or perhaps how can you service a different geography? What are your expansion plans? I mean, we are born to believe that there is some sort of scarcity market, that there is only a couple of places on the top, but that's not true. And you can always differentiate yourself enough in order to then attract an investor, even if there is another company that just raised more money over that. What I would suggest, obviously, don't approach the same investor. I know it probably is an exception, but I thought about an example of what I've heard recently from a startup, which was that they approached an investor and pitched to an investor that already invested in a similar market, and that was in connected autonomous mobility. So it is quite technical and quite competitive at the moment, also quite saturated. and that information of their roadmap somehow made it to their competitor. And I said it's an extreme example, and also it's investors are not terrible people, but they're also humans, so they might have used the intelligence that they've learned for a startup. I would say you can approach any investor, but think twice whether this is the right investor to pitch to. So also be picky, and also try to think, is that investor really good for me?
Yeah, absolutely. I have certainly heard of that happening. And I think it's difficult too with angels, because at least for VCs, you can see who's in their portfolio, but a lot of times with angels, you can't. Just some good like hygiene or best practices on that. Founders always stick your documents on DocSend, and have the person put their email in first, and sure that people can still share the link, but that way roughly who's viewing it, how long they're viewing it for. Again, that can be abused, but I think it's just a good practice to have. So moving on to the actual pitch, what are the key things that founders can do to get like the follow-up meeting?
The investment ecosystem is an incredibly tight network. So at Plug and Play, we have an investment ecosystem of investors that we talk to on the regular basis, and we share the pitch decks of startups that are very interesting. So I would say one thing that we see and we like is when the startup's name comes up across multiple channels. Basically, the more you hear it, the better. And I would say that the best way for this is going to events and meeting startups in person. I mean, I went to your event and I met, a couple of incredible startups, incredible investors, and I believe that one-to-one in-person meeting builds a lot of trust. That is ultimately way better for us to ask for a follow-up meeting as an investor. And another thing is that you want to create that urgency feeling for an investor, but at the same time, you don't want to kind of pressure them into meeting you. So if you have a lead investor already secured for your rounds, shout about that, because that's a great example of your traction, but that's also a de-risking element that other investors would like. So I would say that's a really good idea. If you can also not only go to events, but basically just diversify your outreach and speak to a couple of investors, ask them to then follow up with different investors if they have them in the network. This is really great. And if you know of any, basically what I'm trying to say is that the word of mouth is probably the best way to get a follow-up investment. The second thing that we do at Plug and Play is the investor matchmaking or office hours with investors. So for example, for all the female founders in here, Play for Capital has an incredible women investor hours that you should definitely check out. That's an incredible way to find investors. But also we do some investor office hours for female founders or anything else. So yeah, just hit the investors up on LinkedIn, but also over email. Be very be very consistent. So if an investor doesn't answer you within a week, doesn't mean that they hate you. It's because they get so many emails. So just follow up. Say, hey, I don't know if you've seen it, something of interest or not. If not, fine. If yes, maybe we can have a follow-up meeting.
And how much, we've been asking a lot of the investors in these sessions this question, and how much does valuation actually matter to you? Like if it's a pre-seed round, and obviously this is dependent on whether in the US or UK or Germany, but let's say, the difference between like a 1.5 million and a £2 million round, do investors, or shall I say VCs, care that much?
Oh, that's a good question. So I don't think if in a low valuation, I don't think it matters that much. And obviously you want to, as startup founders, you want to do your job in improving the valuation and making sure that you go as high as you can. The investors will always do it's the other way around. Basically, they want to get more for less, and that's a standard practice. But if you can prove your traction, if you can prove your team value, your, I don't know, market, your product market fit, I don't believe it will be a problem to stand your ground when it comes to the valuation.
Okay, everyone, we're going to move to questions in like probably 1 or 2 minutes. So raise your hand now. But actually, we have a great question in the chat. Where would you recommend, from Diane, where would you recommend including the competition slide? Near the TAM, SAM, and SOM slide, or at the front, at the end? What do you suggest?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because it might help us break a bit of a like a generic understanding of what a good pitch deck looks like. I know that probably lots of you have spent a ton of time on calculating the TAMs and SOMs and SAMs, and less, I would say, people care about these numbers. Obviously, an investor will only invest when they can see, 10x, 100x exit. But at the same time, if you only have 10 minutes, no one really cares about seeing this. As long as the market value can go above, 10 or 100 million, that's okay. So I would say spend less on your TAMs and SAMs and SOMs, spend more on your competition. I would definitely keep it very close to what you're doing, basically, because you start with a problem, you go into what you're doing, and then I would follow up with, what's your products and what's your market, and then go into competition. Mainly because the memory of the investors will still be on the product. They will be trying to get it. They will be trying to make it, make it work in their brains. If you follow up with a competition, that's a perfect way for you to kind of reiterate what you're doing and why you're doing it better than your competition. So that's kind of reinforcing the knowledge that you just conveyed about your product, in the form of that's how we smash our competition through a superior product, service, or different market.
Makes sense. Okay, first question from Catherine Ann.
Thank you. Hi, Agata, nice to see you again.
Hi.
Hi, quick question about, and this is something I've been challenged on, is how we've presented our competitive landscape, is whether to do it as an axis to show where we believe we are. But I've had a couple of investors saying, I want to see what features you're going to have against the features that the competitors have. What's your feeling on? I mean, what I've done is I've done both. But it's like, what is the best? Is it horses for courses, or is there a better way to present that as a whole?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I know of your startups, so I can see exactly why they might be, that split between the feature, but also the companies in general. And in your case, feature, it will be king, because you ultimately want to compete with companies that might add those features or already have there in their roadmap. And that's what ultimately will bring customer to your company or your platform over other platforms. And that's how you differentiate. And so I would suggest sticking with that. But also in terms of where you're going or how do you position yourself against other companies, is that I don't quite like the competition slide where you have the X and you position yourself in different quadrants, mainly because you will always end up in the best spot, right in the right top corner. And that's all right. But at the same time, I like to be a little bit more down to earth, and instead of looking at expensive, cheap, and excellent and trashy, I would like to see more factors that you put into place. So I really like to see the grid splits in competition. So basically, you take a look at the features of your competitors, like price, services, etc., etc., and then you look at yourself. and you look at your competition. That allows you to go a little bit more in depth, but it also helps the investors understand that this is your selling point. The reason why you score high in all those factors is because you are superior on the factors that you choose yourself. And it also, instead of only 4 points, very radical points like, cheap, expensive, or like B2B, B2C, it helps you to put in maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 different elements that you can differentiate yourself against your competition.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you. That's really helpful. Thanks a lot.
Awesome.
All right. Any other questions? Okay. Peta, do you have any?
Hi, I have a question.
Oh, sure. Go for it.
Okay, yeah. So in terms of competition, like how deep is one expected to go? So can one talk about like the pricing model of the competition, the features that the competition offers, and how exactly, even though your features can be somewhat similar, how your approach is different, and how you're different? Like, do investors want to know the details of all of that?
That's a great question, because I would say that this is the case where I'm going to say a very annoying answer, which is it depends. So basically, it depends on whether the price point, for example, is something that your economic buyers are very sensitive about. If it's a shampoo, then yes, of course, you need to put the price, because it really matters to your consumer, whether it's £5 or £10. If it's something to do with satellites, I mean, whether that's 2 million or 2,200,000 per satellite, doesn't really matter. Not really, because price is not something that you need to differentiate yourself against. And so I would say finding those, I call them factors, but they could be the markers that you want to put yourself against, would really depends on your business model and your market and your customer. So let's say if we look at the let's say B2B SaaS platform, right? I would definitely look at my competition in terms of the business model, whether that's a subscription, freemium, pay once, whatever. I would look at the business model, because that's how you can easily differentiate yourselves. If all of your competitors do SaaS and you don't quite know how to break into that market, maybe you just need to do something else. So I would use that. And then generally, I would just try to take a look at what do we do better. Is my shampoo or my direct-to-consumer product superior because of the sustainability? Fab. Well, use that as a differentiator in your competitor analysis. Or, how much CO2 is being produced, or literally something. It really depends on your product, but I think that it can't be just the standard one that you will see everywhere. It really has to be something that you do in terms of your own excellence. I hope that helped.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, now I'm going to call on, I can't see your name, but I see Samsung. So Samsung, I'm calling on you. Oh, we can't hear you. There might be a problem with your audio because I don't see the microphone icon next to you. Yeah, I can't hear you. Do you want to exit and then rejoin? Okay.
Maybe you can just pop it into the chat as well.
Yeah, feel free to do it either. In the meantime, Keith, over to you.
Hi, Agata. I'm Keith. Basically, I'm doing a app for doggy owners to connect and meet up. So I've got a few questions more about the pitch deck in terms of what's your preference. I know there's never a right way to it. First is that I've been asked many times, sometimes like, do you prefer to see the team or the founder story as a first slide, or is it a nicer flow to sort of show the team slide at the back especially the founder story. And then the second thing is that in regards to what you just mentioned about business model, how would you prefer to see the deck as like just one go-to business model with a potential exploration for other business model, or is that a preferred way to, because ultimately where I am right now is that I'm still testing out the business model. So on the pitch, I have gone with purely subscription because I've been recommended that subscription is a good way for a VC or for angel to gauge the scalability. So I went with that. But my ultimate, there's also other B2B to C sort of revenue model that I'm exploring. So should I put it all into one deck in terms of this is where I think all the revenue models are, or should I just go with the, like the primary model? And the last question I have, I know there's a lot, is that I'm a solo founder. Do you have any advice or recommendation on how I should make myself more investable?
Nice. All right, let me quickly go through the question. So around the team, I honestly, doesn't matter, whatever you prefer. And from my experience, I'm used to the flow that you might, because sometimes your storytelling will open with your own problem, which is perfect. I would start with this still. But when it comes to the team, usually that's how people close. You know, they say, this is our competition, this is our roadmap, this is how we ask for, and this is our team, or like sometimes our team, and this is how we ask for, how much we ask for. So that really is up to you. There's no wrong or right way, especially if you have a kick-ass team. I would go for it. I would like use it at the very beginning to say, this is exactly what we do. And this is who we are. And don't be afraid to brag about your experiences if you've done it before. If if you're a dog owner, you know exactly the pain points. I would suggest really upping. And I know that especially first-time founders or solo founders or female founders or underrepresented background founders have an issue with self-glorification, but I would say this is not the point to do that. This is not the right time. Now, business model, this is a great question, because I literally got off a call today speaking about the same thing. What I would suggest, and what I suggested to another startup, was to build in a roadmap slide into your pitch deck, talking about what are you planning to do within the next 3, 6 months and a year. That can include hiring new team, opening in new geographies, but also opening and testing new business models. And in that way, you don't sound like you don't know what you need, want, or know the market. You sound like you're open to exploring different opportunities. And I think switching that around is going to be very beneficial for you, because investors will run away the moment you casually mention to them that you're not sure about your business model. But once you say, we want to explore or different business models in your product roadmap, that's going to be really not that big a deal. And the last part about the solo founder, are you technical or are you commercial?
I'm commercial, yeah. Brand and marketing to be exact, yeah. So I intend to find a founding CTO, but at the moment I don't have it. I do know that there's a few avenues I can go. Obviously find the perfect co-founder. I know that's difficult. That's always even more difficult than finding a husband, I think, for me. Because I think there's a lot more at stake, especially if you're building a, I don't know. I mean, my husband is not here, but he'll probably be, like, what do you mean? But anyway, so I know finding the perfect, the ideal co-founder. I do not have been advised potentially to sort of find like founding CTOs, founding, CFO, salespeople, and also potentially finding like basically getting on board a group of excellent advisory that could feel that can basically complement my skill set. So yeah, I mean, I'm more inclined towards finding like the so-called like the founding team, a founding CTO instead of finding a co-founder. I mean, that's my gut, because it's like I have tried finding co-founder and that's okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's completely fine. I mean, you'd rather not find a co-founder and be okay than find someone who's fit. So that's able to support you when you are struggling. And that's why we like 2 co-founders or 3 co-founders. It's because there will be times where you need to focus 100% of your time on fundraising, and who's gonna lead the product development. You know, in that case, you need someone because you can't do all of it. But what you can substitute the co-founder with is, a CTO or an advisor or someone who is happy to support you, perhaps in 30% of their capacity. So it doesn't have to be a co-founder. And the solo founder is also cool, as long as you have the support mechanism behind what you're doing. And very often when you have 2 co-founders and one of them is fundraising, that's their only job. And the other person's job is business development, product market fit. So you just need to find that balance.
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks for your advice.
All
My
right.
pleasure.
Samsung, I'm going to try it again with you, but I still don't see the microphone icon next to your name. So I'm wondering if we can hear it's working. No, I can't hear you. No, oh darn. Okay, do you want to type your question into the chat? That might be the best option. Okay, and now we'll go on to Jin.
Yeah, I was wondering about how you would approach some of the tactics or strategies that you've mentioned, but for more like physical products. So using my example, I'm doing a swimwear brand for like different shapes and sizes to be more supportive. But yeah.
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
Yeah, sure. So how would you approach some of the tactics or strategies that you've mentioned, but for more like physical based products? So in my case, doing swimwear.
I get it. Yes. Oh, that's a good one, because obviously I always say that hardware is hard, and in your case, it's also direct to consumer. And I don't have enough experience to tell you exactly what, and please, I think you should definitely liaise with someone who has more experience than myself. But I would say that differentiation is key. So you said you want to create swimwear that's supportive of different body types, etc., and lifestyles. That's already a great point of sale for an investor. And looking at it, how can you differentiate yourself from, because if you look at the competition, it's massive, right? It's every single high streets and cheap brand that ever existed. So you need to start narrowing. So this is your pool. So you need to start narrowing yourself down to, okay, we do it sustainably. That's already, 90% of all of the brands out of the window. Then you say we are inclusive. So we are, sizes from A to Z. That's already, again, another part of the competition gone. And they are still there. There is still your competition. But I mentioned earlier the secondary, tertiary competition. Do keep that in mind, because technically they are not your direct competitors. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is, that's what we love it, plug and play. But basically, whenever we hear someone trying to sell directly to consumers, we are a little bit averse of that business model, because it is difficult, and it probably best, how difficult it is to get every single sale. That's why I would suggest think bigger than this. Instead of selling only to directly to consumers, go and try to find your B2B sales funnel. And that way, obviously that sales funnel is going to take longer, because you have to negotiate, blah, 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 blah. But at the same time, once you do it, you have a constant stream of customers coming through a different brand. And so I would always try to look for different avenues to make your money and kind of diversify your revenue stream. Because if you only want to build your brand, that's great, but you might burn out before you manage to create a sustainable and profitable brand.
Cool, thank you. I have one more question, and it's again this is more related to my brand. So my co-founder, who's my sister, is going to be like a public speaker. So she's going to be on TikTok, and she is the exact kind of shape that we're targeting. So the focal point is people that are very slim but have very full busts, but we're also supporting all other types of shapes and sizes as well. But she's going to be using TikTok to rate and review other competitors' products. Is this something that we could include in our pitch? And where do you think, if possible?
I would say that's traction, and don't feel afraid of putting that. Especially if you get like, you can throw the number of, I don't know, TikTok that's maybe like, you know, how many people have seen that. If it just screenshot it literally and say, this is our campaign, and we managed to reach, you know, I don't know, hundreds, 1,000 people with that. And that's a great traction, because that automatically kind of gives you a lot of impressions on your brand. And I think that your sister could also have like your logo in the back, and so wearing the swimsuit herself, and, you know, just do something to promote that. I would definitely screenshot that, put it in the pitch deck, say, you know, we launched a successful event, or yeah, whatever that will be. And I would use that as my traction. That would be great.
Thank you.
All right, final question. Samsung's question has come in. Can you add your name too? I feel bad calling you Samsung, but that's all I can see. Okay, so the question is, in a market where there is minimal information about the competition, and I don't want to underestimate the competition out there, Google hasn't been helpful. The geography is in Africa, but I'm wondering if there are ways to make investors comfortable enough to look at the company. And then how would you deep dive into differentiating yourself from the competition? Should you focus more on the commercial side and tech side? I think I understood your question correctly, but please add in more context if I didn't.
Okay, so minimal information about the competition. I mean, sometimes it just happens that, you know, it's very difficult to just Google and learn about your competition. And that's a great way for, if you have a chance to go to conferences or get into the network of where your competitors live. So, you know, if you're in the skincare market, I don't know why I'm obsessed with skincare and shampoo, sorry. If you're in that market, go to conferences when all of those people congregate, and try to get as much intel around your competitors as possible. I know that in the tech world, I mean, going to conferences like Sifted or any of the events is a great way to learn about different brands, different competitors, different business models. And I would literally, and if you can't find anything at all, try to just get a one-on-one call with them. I mean, it might be sneaky when you say, oh, I'm doing a research for my school or whatever, but you know, this is the way to do it. Sometimes you don't need to get into confidential information, intelligence from them, but just learning about your competition. I think it should be a very first thing that you actually do. You know, when I have a business idea, I literally go Google and Google it. Luckily, I've been, well, lucky enough to find it easily. But yeah, hopefully, I mean, hope that helped. I would like a deep dive to differentiate between commercial and tech. Is that commercial team, do you think, or?
I think it means like, how should you differ? Is it better to differentiate yourself on the technical front or on the commercial front? Does it matter which way you differentiate yourself? I think I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, I get it. I guess both. It really depends on what you're doing. If a price point is your differentiation, that's commercial, perfect. If your product is more superior to other products, then it's obviously tech. But I think both is great. If you can do either one, it's perfect. I think, you know, sometimes if you have a water bottle, you can't really differentiate it technologically from another water bottle. But what you can do is you can go into commercials, you can go into branding, you can go into price points. You can really choose what you want to differentiate yourself against. But that's a product. What about the service? I mean, again, excellence in what you're doing. If you're doing it better, if you charge less, I guess it depends on what you're after.
And for the last questions, we're going to go over to Purdy, who has 2 really good questions.
One of them you kind of just very briefly touched on, but it's not really from an investor's perspective, but just your opinion on the like co-opetition, like cooperating with your competition. And actually, I think a lot of people, they keep their cards quite close to their chest, especially when they're talking to competitors or thinking about competitors, because they don't want to give away the edge that they've got. But do you have any opinions on whether actually speaking to your competition and building relationships with them is a good thing?
This is a fantastic question. And I love, keeping your cards to yourself, being very secretive and being very competitive. I think that this is something that we've learned from the old type of entrepreneurs from back in the days, which was, very stale, very competitive. I think, and it's my personal view, that we are over this. We are inclusive and we want to collaborate. And if there's a way for us to do it, I believe this is such a fantastic opportunity, because not only you can learn from each other, you can also actually achieve the excellence and then see where could you differentiate yourselves. So let's say I have a great example of plug and play. So plug and play, what you do great is that we scout companies for our corporation partners. And then we often collaborate with companies like Deloitte, KPMG, EY, etc., because they are excellent at bespoke consulting projects. What we do, technically, they could do what we do and we could do what they do. That's not a problem. But the best thing is that we actually now cross-sell our services. And that's such a great way to collaborate, because we don't necessarily believe that we want to go in that space. If we do, I'm sure we would talk about it and figure it all out. But I still believe that collaborating is everything. There is a comment about meeting with your competitors every 6 weeks. That's amazing. I think that this is so incredible, because that's how you can actually cross-pollinate the ideas and think about, okay, if I do this, then maybe you can go this way and you can do something else. And being open. I'm not telling about, sharing your IP, keep that close to yourself.
My second question was just related to some of the feedback that you were giving to Jin. So if you do have a B2B and a B2C model that you're growing at the same time, and you're trying to communicate that on a pitch deck, the problem will be the same and the solutions might be slightly different. When you get to slides like the competition slide, do you then have to have 2 slides, one for the B2B version of the competitor and one for the B2C version of the competitor? Or what's the best way to wrap that all up into your narrative?
That's great. Yeah, I didn't even think about it. Honestly, I've never seen 2 sets of competitors on the slide. So I think in this case, I would, in terms of competitors, I would choose, I would still do 1 grid. And now, as I said, I would suggest doing a grid. For me, it really is the best way. I would still do 1 grid, but maybe split the competitors into 2 columns and say B2B, B2C. And the other way to think about it is that what is more important for you right now? Who are your competitors for the round that you're raising at the moment? Because it might be that you're thinking about, launching B2B, but your competitors ultimately might be the same, especially for the swimwear brand. Your competitors will be still the swimwear manufacturers and those brands, but not only swimwear manufacturers who sell to B2B, if you know what I mean. So sometimes the competitors stay the same. Sometimes you will have different solutions, as you said. So I would say you can differentiate it in your pitch deck if it makes sense. If it doesn't, just don't overcomplicate it.
Thank you.
All right, wonderful. Agata, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And what is the best way for people to find out more about you, Plug and Play, and Pink Brew?
Yes, please. I mean, I love working with startups, with founders. And so I'm going to throw a Plug and Play link over here in the chat. Please do follow us. We have an incredible set of events. Just yesterday, I was in Coventry doing an event in EV and the future of luxury EV. At the same time, we work a lot with female founders. So we had a female founder event last week or 2 weeks ago. And this is Pink Brew Studio. So we basically do a nonprofit. We're a nonprofit gathering of female founders, female underrepresented founders, and we love to support everyone. And eventually, if you have any questions, if you think Plug and Play would be a good investment opportunity for you, do hit me up on LinkedIn. I will make sure to get back to you. If you have any other question about, for example, you'd like to be connected to one of our corporation partners, please do send me a message on LinkedIn. I'll definitely get back to you, because I love doing this and it's my passion.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, everyone, thank you for joining us for 2 double sessions on a Tuesday. And we will see you on Thursday. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.